Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our today's keynote session on risks and conflicts. Especially I want to welcome our two speakers for today, Dr. Stephan Baas from FAO and Professor Derek Gregory from the University of British Columbia in Canada. Stephan Baas will start our session today with his talk on disaster risk and crisis, challenges for food and nutrition security. But first, let me say a few words about him. Stephan Baas holds master degrees in social anthropology and geography and a PhD in physical geography. His PhD research was on Somalia and the capacities and the interface between natural resources availability and pastoral production patterns. Before joining the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in Rome in 1994, he worked with the German CTZ, mainly in Africa, and with ETSAF, the Council for Tropical and Subtropical Agricultural Research, based in Stuttgart. When joining the FAO, he initially worked on rural development and poverty alleviation. Since 1996, he is focusing on disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation for smallholder farmers and herders. In his work, he particularly stresses the importance of institutional capacity development, including community-based approaches, as well as the integration of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation into development and existing sectoral planning agendas. Moreover, his work clearly shows that the need for multidisciplinarity and cross-sectoral perspectives. Currently, Stephan Baas is co-chair of FAO's Interdepartmental Working Group on Climate Change Adaptation. In 2010 and 11, he coordinated the development of the FAO Framework Program for Climate Change Adaptation, that is FAO ADAPT. He also co-chair of FAO's Interdepartmental Technical Team on Disaster Risk Management. In this capacity, he coordinated and co-authored the FAO's new framework program, Disaster Risk Reduction for Food and Nutrition Security, in 2012. Over the last 15 years, Stephan Baas designed and implemented more than 30 field projects, many in Asia, in the Caribbean, but also in Africa and Eastern Europe. But Stephan Baas is also a very practical man. So he told me just this morning that he's also a farmer, growing his own olives and olive oil on his family farm in Umbria. So, Dr. Baas, I'm eagerly looking forward to your keynote lectures. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Stephan Baas to our conference.
Thank you very much, Professor Braun, for this very kind introduction. It's my pleasure to be here, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, to be here on behalf of the Natural Resources Department of FAO and to be provided with this opportunity to talk to you on key issues affecting food nutrition and also the risks to food nutrition. Let me start by saying that access for all to sufficient food and healthy and nutritious food is a basic human right. For many of us, getting food these days meaning basically going to the supermarket or going to the fridge, take it out. And there's a tendency to forget that many people in the world face big challenges to produce or to access their food, in particular in least developed countries. Often they don't get their daily meals. In the past decades, agriculture and food and nutrition security falls or fell behind other development priorities. Only recently, particularly emphasized at the Rio +20 this year, food security has been brought back on the agenda, and right so. We need food every day. It is our mandate and joint obligation to ensure food and nutrition for all, now and in the future. This is indeed a very big challenge, with many risks attached, which we have to identify, analyze, understand and counteract. The 2008 food crisis showed in several countries very quickly how food insecurity can turn into civil unrest. The increasing numbers of mega disasters like recent floods in Pakistan or Thailand, the Fukushima cascading disasters, and the long-lasting droughts in Australia and the Horn of Africa, and this year in the Sahel and the US, they are very alerting. These disasters create big suffering, damage and losses, and beyond these events themselves, visible impacts at national but also at global levels on food production and food prices. And not to forget the hidden and often neglected small disasters which do not make it into the news and do not trigger any international emergency support. They threaten the livelihood security of millions of people every year, basically every day. The variety of risks and challenges to food and nutrition security is a huge topic, which I cannot cover in all its complexities, but I want to share with you some recent data and thoughts which are crucial to consider and call for enhanced action and investment into food and nutrition security and risk management to ensure that we can achieve the basic right to food for all now in the future and in the future. I hope these thoughts will inspire you to carry on discussions in your sessions or in your research afterwards. Please do not expect too many solutions from me because we have many of the solutions not ready at hand. We have to develop the solutions in the process of moving towards 2050. My presentation applies the perspective of development planning. I will first review some important global trends and challenges we face when trying to achieve food and nutrition security for all. I will do that mainly from a natural resource management angle, and I will call your attention on land and water systems at risk, as recently presented in FAO's report, The State of the World's Land and Water Resources for Food and Agriculture. Thereafter, I will talk more specifically about types of disasters and crises specifically affecting food and nutrition security, and introduce in brief what FAO recommends food insecure developing countries, this is my focus, and smallholders in particular, to reduce their exposure to risk and impacts of disasters and crises. I will conclude with some thoughts about key needs on the way forwards towards risk reduction for food and nutrition security. Let me start with the biggest challenge ahead. UN estimates that by 2050, global population will have grown to 9.2 billion people. This, of course, induces the need for more production of food. And the estimates taking the global population growth, but also changing consumption patterns into consideration, are that globally we assume that we need to produce 60% more food than we do today. And out of that, 100% increase has to happen in developing countries. That is indeed a very big challenge. And we should not forget, not talking only about food production itself, it's also to have healthy food, nutritious food. I just presented to you the big challenge ahead. This is where we are. In spite of the fact that in principle we produce enough food for all today, this is the hunger map of 2011. 925 million people go to bed hungry every day. You see the countries which are most affected. But it's not only the people of absolute which are affected directly by hunger, it's about 2 billion people all over the world who are affected by nutrition deficits and malnutrition. You see about the darkest parts of the map show where the highest percentage are partly over 35% of the population. If we add a risk perspective now on the situation, the challenge, and where we start from and how we move from the start to where we want to go to. It's just an overview. There are several global trends affecting food and nutrition security now and in the future. Population growth, I already mentioned. Urbanization. Already these days, we heard 50% of the global population are in cities. In 2070, we expect that it's 70%. This, of course, has implications for food production and consumption. The globalization of trade, and as we all know, climate change puts another layer on it. But it's not only the global trends we have to look at. Location-specific drivers of risk include natural resources and environmental processes, the way we use our lands, socio-economic framework conditions in the countries or at the local scale and also at the global scale. Poverty in many developing countries, which are the most food insecure, is a key issue, as well as weak institutions or weak governance. All these factors together create the contextual vulnerability. And on top of that, we face the threats of acute shocks like disasters and crises. As I said, I cannot cover all of this. I will focus on the two issues which are highlighted here in red. I'm looking at you I'm showing here this is the natural resources base on which agricultural production mainly depends. I take crop production as an example here, recognizing that a lot of food is also produced by fisheries these days, but we know that the marine fish resources as well as the inland fish resources are unlikely to be widely expanded in the future, whereas aquaculture has potentials. But a crop production is the main source of our stable food, since it also contributes to intensive livestock feeding to a big degree. So 12% of our land is currently used for crop production. As compared to that, agriculture already uses 70% of all water withdrawn at the global level. And we can expect with the global trends that the competition around these resources is increasing. Let us look at the land first. What is the land available for cropping? This gives an indication of how much has been used where currently. That is the data goes back to 2005 to 2007, according to developed countries and some developing regions. And the green indicates our projections how the land surface can be increased. And the estimations are pretty low, that only 70 million hectares increase of agricultural land for cropping is likely for 2050. This is for several reasons. One is that the quality of land available is not everywhere the same, and most of the best land is already underused. It has also to do with the fact that agriculture is not as attractive as it used to be. There is a move out of agriculture, which also does not increase the spread of agricultural land. But basically, the matter is there is not enough good land to expand. In developed countries and some other countries like China or Vietnam, we already see signs of decreased use of land for cropping, basically through unsustainable use in a way that land degrades in an irreversible way. Looking at the water, this shows that the trend of irrigation, which contributed about 40% to the production increase during the last 40 years. If we look at the figures between 1961 to 2009, we see that the land expansion was only about 12%, whereas in the same period, the expansion of irrigated area was more than double. This, however, in the future for 2050 cannot extend in the same scope. Our projections say that by 2050, maybe 301 million hectare could be irrigated, which again is a limitation. So both land and water put limitations on increased agricultural production. In terms of water, which we consider the bigger constraint even, there is this water scarcity map, and we have to see that already 1/3 of the world population lives under water scarcity. The definition of water scarcity is a bit complex. I don't want to go into it. It's a relation between demand and availability and access to water in those countries. Now, mapping the risks of land and water systems on agricultural production, we just came up with this study I mentioned earlier. We call it SOLAF in abbreviation, has mapped out a series of systems at risk, agricultural production systems at risk currently, and the risks vary widely. This is from the blue ones are water related, though the brown ones are land related. But there's also loss of biodiversity or pollution. But it shows that all over the world there are agricultural systems highly at risk that in the future they may not be able to produce as much as they produce now, and we need this production increase. I would recommend to those of you who are interested in this to have a look at this study, which you find on our website. It, of course, outlines and maps in great details the different systems under risk, like here mountain areas you see in Morocco, or delta areas, which is surprisingly the Nile Delta is an area of very big water scarcity, simply because of water overuse, but also arid zones which are with water scarcity, or highlands with high population densities. Small island states or the Himalaya forests are other examples. So it's widespread. So the question is, how can we, looking at this natural resource endowment, actually increase our demand? What our economists say is that mainly it has to come through yield increases, which you see here in green. Yield increases means higher yields per crop. The scope for crop intensity increase, which means to increase the use of the land, by reducing fallow periods or increasing irrigation, meaning you get not 100% crop out of a piece of land, but through 2 harvests, maybe 200%. The scope to increase there is very little, and as earlier discussed, the scope for area increase is also very limited. So it's yield increase, meaning we need better cropping material, but it also has implications. We need more fertilizer, we may need more pesticides to protect the crops we're putting on the land, which again has a high risk of environmental impacts. So there are really big challenges ahead. Another area, this is a result of a very recent study done in 2011 by FAO with some partners, is there is big scope actually along the food supply chain to increase food availability. The overall result of this study is that currently every year we lose 30% of the food, of the agriculture crop and the food produced during the supply chain. This graphic shows you the different types of crops or meat or cereals, fruits and seafood. And it shows that the loss in primary production in some of the commodities is high, but very high levels in post-harvest processing, distribution and consumption. A pattern we see there is that the losses in developed countries is much more on the consumption and distribution, whereas currently the losses in developing countries is a lot in post-harvest and primary production. But if we manage to reduce the losses which we face here, this also creates scope to at the end have the table on the food on the table we may need. But of course it also induces new challenges because of food chain security and food chain security risks. On this climate change, I only want to touch very briefly. This is everywhere. It's fundamentally important. This goes back to the IPCC report you all know from 2007, 2008. The impacts on agriculture forecasted are dramatic, particularly in the tropical and world, in the developing countries. And it's important to note also the green area. So they're not only losers in terms of agricultural production potential, they're also winners. Another impact of climate change we have to take in consideration, as reported by the SREX report, the special report of the IPCC this year, is that also the likelihood of extreme events is going to increase through climate change. So again, another layer of challenges to reach our big objective of food security in 2050 or also now. But let me move at this point to the disasters, which on top of this kind of baseline threaten food security. Disasters destroy livelihoods, reduce food production and increase hunger. Disaster and crisis reverse development and poverty reduction gains. There's a clear link between shocks and hunger, which is the fragility of our current food production systems. And the amount of people is tremendous. 2.5 billion smallholders worldwide are particularly exposed regularly to extreme events and climate risks. In 2011 alone, the losses of reported and documented natural disasters or disasters in general was 200 billion, which was twice the overseas development assistance budget which is available. So it really shows there is scope to do something, there is a need to do something. The categories of disasters specifically addressing or threatening food security, first of all, is natural hazards. From this slide, we take the message over the last 30 years, and the tendency is the same, except of 2011, where the number went a bit down, is that it's overall increasing. Particularly climatic-induced extreme events, floods and droughts are dramatically on the increase. 230 million people are affected annually. And if you look at this graphic from the UNISDR 2012, the economic losses over the last 11 years is 1.3 trillion US dollars, with a tendency to increase because recently also developed countries were very heavily hit, and of course the physical loss of infrastructure, etc., in developed countries is extremely high. 2.7 billion people were affected in that period, and 1.1 million were killed, with some peaks like through the Indian tsunami or the earthquake in Haiti are in there. But the good message on that side is through improved disaster risk reduction work, this, except of the very extreme events, this number is not increasing. And is a good indicator that we need to continue in that direction to do more for preventive action. The next group of disasters, very dangerous from the perspective of food and nutrition security, are food chain crisis and transboundary threats. You can read the different types of hazards and disasters which are subsumed in this category, like rinderpest, which we perceive as a very big success, which was declared eradicated after 20 years in 2011. Avian influenza, locust infestations, dioxin, and many others. But they have major impact on the food production and the food chain. Just one example, avian influenza was very much in the press 4 or 5 years ago, and one may assume it's under control, but these are data from 2012. There are still outbreaks, and it's very important to maintain systems of regular detection, prevention, and quick action to avoid wider spread of this type of highly contagious epidemic diseases. Another big threat we see is, and we have experienced, it is the food price volatility. 2008, I mentioned it was the food crisis which led to major distortions in many countries. And if you look at this graphic, which is our actual index, 2012, we are moving to the same level. The only difference right now is that the food stocks globally of maize, of rice are significantly higher than in 2008. But it is a situation. Our Director General recently has sent again an alert to all developing countries that we are at the threshold that the next crisis may come. You can also see that 2011, the prices were actually higher than in 2008 when the crisis was felt first. Protected crisis is another area where agencies like FAO have a major role to play. These are protected crisis is defined as countries from the food nutrition security perspective which are in the situation of recurrent crisis for more than 7 years. Currently it's 22, and the characteristics of these countries is there is conflict, there is multiple hazard exposure. On the conflict comes a drought, and so on. There are weak institutions, there are limited services, and the type of assistance which is needed there goes in the direction to assist in providing those services, while at the same time, particularly at the local level, ensuring that people can continue to produce food and ensure their livelihoods. The proportion of undernourished people is 3 times higher in those countries as in other developing countries. What do we recommend to countries, particularly developing countries, what they can do to possibly reduce at least the impacts of the disasters and the crisis? For that, it was already mentioned, we have developed this framework on resilient livelihoods, disaster risk reduction for food and nutrition security. You can read the definition of resilience we are applying. We really put resilience at the center with 2 critical characteristics of resilient livelihood systems which we want to promote. And that is the ability to withstand a threat and related crisis and buffer their impacts, and to adapt to a new livelihood pathway in the face of crisis. Very important here to say is that we want to move away from this approach of emergency response and not perceive it as an emergency cycle as it was used in the past, which has nothing to do with the development work. We are bringing development and emergency humanitarian assistance work together and want to work along a continuum, assuming that the crisis and the disasters really affect the economic growth pattern which we hope that the countries can achieve. So we want to bring those together. It's very important, and it covers preventive action, preparedness, response, recovery, and rehabilitation, integrated into development. In terms of thematic topics, which we consider essential to address, first, the enabling environment, institutional environment, which is very key, and we focus particularly on the sectoral institutional environment of agriculture, forestry, fisheries, ministries, and departments to become more active partners and capacitated partners on proactive risk management. Of course, we need to also put equal importance on information, on data, all the background data, the statistics, but also the early warning systems, which you can imagine from the transboundary pests and diseases, food nutrition security warning systems, but also climate warning systems, all relevant for the farmers to know what is going to happen in the next season, possibly fundamentally important for the system to withstand and to be alert in case they need to confront a disaster. Then the preparedness to respond, like piling up stocks globally, nationally, locally, of seeds, of food, but also of fertilizer to be prepared to have contingency plans. What do we do in case the flood comes? Or what do we do if a drought comes, and who does it? Very important means to put in place. And in many places, particularly if you look from the sectoral perspective, they are not in place. Our disaster management systems worldwide are significantly improving, but they are very much looking at infrastructure, at housing, at saving lives, and not so much saving the livelihoods, the long-term livelihoods of small-scale agricultural producers. Finally, to promote the livelihoods themselves with technologies in agriculture, in natural resource management, in fisheries. There is plenty of technology out there. The problem is that we have to enable people to get access to them, share the knowledge, but also develop new technologies, and there disciplines like geography and, of course, plant breeding, etc., are fundamentally important. More important than the message that we have to address all these things is that we have to address them in an integrated way and at all levels, at global level, at national level, and at local levels. If we only invest into good early warning systems, this is very important, but if there are not the institutions in place to reinforce them, then they don't help as much as they could, because it may be that people don't obtain the messages. Here, that's the slide saying we need to move from the global to the local and back, and we need to integrate, work in an interdisciplinary way, all the disciplines which affect food and nutrition security, and along the thematic pillars I just mentioned. Cross-cutting priorities we see as FAO, there's a lot of advocacy still needed to get these systems in place. Knowledge management is fundamental. Capacity development at all levels, including in our own agency, to make this transfer from reactive to proactive risk management, and strategic partnerships with research, with extension, and with other countries and agencies. A final message on the interface of disaster risk reduction and climate change. They're coming from two different origins, as we know, but from the agricultural perspective, we really try to send the message out that we should address them in an integrated way, because if it goes down to the farmers level, they cannot distinguish between the two. They have to address it in a joint way. So we really argue for merging the agendas to the degree possible, while recognizing that at both ends of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, there are issues which the other community of practice is not addressing, but together they will address it all. Finally, some ways forward for risk reduction for food and nutrition security. First, agricultural production objectives and environmental objectives require to be addressed together and to achieve sustainable solutions. We were not good enough in bringing these two disciplines together in the past. We need to move from reactive crisis management to proactive risk approaches. We need to better link and integrate humanitarian and development assistance. And we need to invest much more into long-term approaches and funding for systemic understanding and management of vulnerabilities, risk and resilience building. These areas, except of emergency response, are still significantly underfunded. We need to strengthen governance mechanisms towards more sustainable, fair and transparent food systems at local, national, regional and global levels. And we need to invest more on data generation, research, multidisciplinary analysis, knowledge management and extension service. These are lessons and the way forward on a bit of a high level, but if we don't tackle them all together, we may not have the luxury to really come and address the details. Finally, we need geography. We need geographical information systems, geospatial analysis, and based on that, sound planning for food and nutrition security now and in the future. And we need more geographers as well to contribute to our actions on the ground to achieve food and nutrition security and enhanced risk reduction. Thank you very much.